Hello and welcome to Module 2 of your Level 3 Revision Mastery Nutrition series, and this module is all about macro and micronutrient groups. So we're going to be digging in nice and deep into not only all of your macronutrients but also your micronutrients. So we're going to be right into carbohydrates, proteins, fats, everything you need to know about them, but also about vitamins and minerals as well. So a lot of content in today's session. Some of this will be more than appropriate for your exam. Remember, that's where we're steering all of these revision mastery series towards. But also this fundamental knowledge, even if it doesn't come up in your exam in detail, will allow you to understand other areas of your nutrition from an exam point of view, but also for working with clients, because these are the fundamentals. As soon as you really understand what is a macro, or what is actually in the foods that we eat and how that serves a purpose in our body, only then can we start understanding the diets and the nutrition input that our clients have in their body, and understanding the effect that that has on their body itself as well. So that's really where we're steering all of this information towards. It's about your knowledge as much as it is about being able to be prepared for that exam so you've passed first time. So let's go into what we're actually going to talk about here. We're going to understand the function of each of the macronutrients, and as I said a moment ago, that's carbs, fats and proteins. We're going to look at understanding the RDA of each macronutrient. Now this is the recommended daily amount, so how much your client should actually be consuming of each one. And explain how each macronutrient is digested and used. So what is the function for it? Why do we even need it? And how do we digest it into our bodies? Then we're going to also understand the importance of micronutrients as a big part of this, and that's our vitamins and minerals. And then at the end of all this, you've got a cheat sheet that you can also download, and you'll find this next to the video. So make sure that you download that one, and you can use it to check your competency at the very end of the entire module, which is a fantastic way to see how much of this actually stuck in your head as we go on through. So on a previous module, we touched on balanced diets and what a balanced diet actually is and what nutrition actually is. So now we're going to look at, are all macronutrients equal? So each macro has its own function, and they are very different functions, which is why we need that diet to be balanced. We need to have a balanced nutrition going on in our bodies. And it's not just about overall calories that we consume. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, as long as you hit your 2,000 a day or your 2,005 a day or whatever it might be, then you're okay. It doesn't matter. But actually, because there is a different level of calories per gram in carbohydrates, fats and proteins, we need to know those differences, partly for exam, but also because we then know the impact that having a certain number of grams of fat or a certain number of grams of protein will have in comparison to consuming the other. So the first thing that you need to know, and you definitely need to know this for your exam, so make sure your ears are pricked up, carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. So that means every gram that you consume that is carbohydrate based will offer you 4 calories. Now that is the same for protein as well. So both of those sit at 4 calories per gram. But fat, on the other hand, is 9 calories per gram. So this is really important to remember the differences of, because you could have a 10-gram portion of carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and they won't give you all the same number of calories in the output. So it's about it meeting the calorie requirement for that macro as it's broken down, rather than about meeting calorie requirement overall or a set number of grams. So make sure you're really clear on the differences between those 4, 4 and 9. There is also one more. Now this is not a macronutrient, however some people I'm sure will wish it is. Alcohol actually has a separate level of calories per gram, and that's because of how it's made, and that's 7 calories per gram, so it's closer to being pure fat than anything. So this is something to really consider, and an amazing educational point whilst you're talking with your clients in particular. So if your client has a tendency to go for alcohol-based drinks, then actually you can use this as a kind of leverage as to why they may be gaining weight, why there may be surplus calories in their diet. Because if they're consuming a lot of alcohol, it's almost the same as consuming a lot of fat, based purely on the number of calories per gram. So 4 calories for carbohydrate, 4 for protein, 9 for fat, and 7 for alcohol. So remember, alcohol is not one of our macronutrients, but you do need to know those differences as well. So we're going to go through each of the macronutrients in a lot more detail so we can actually really understand what's going on. So we're going to start off with fat, and there are many different principles about fat that we need to know about, but there's lots of different views on fat. Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? Do we need it? How much of it do we need? So I'm going to go through and answer all of these throughout this whole presentation. We do need it. We definitely need fat. That's my simple answer, and it is good for us. We have 4 major uses for the fats that we consume. So for our dietary fat, one is that we store it, and we can store it in our subcutaneous fat. Now, subcutaneous fat is the stuff stored just underneath the skin, so that when, like in the picture here, when you grab a fold of skin, so a skin fold, you might have done this on some fitness tests within your personal training, for example, you do a skin fold measurement, that's also measuring the amount of fat under the skin, so in that subcutaneous layer just underneath the skin. Now, we can use that for energy, and we can release it back out of those energy stores. So the reason why we've evolved to be able to be hoarding fat is because our ancestors would have gone through a series of fasts and famines and feasts, which means they need to be able to store fat so they could retrieve it in times of famine. So it's logical that we actually still have those genes. We still have that tendency to store fat in case we hit a moment of famine. And we need that storage of subcutaneous fat so we can use it and oxidize it ready for energy use. There are more important things though, not just for fat on top of the body, because you might go, well, I don't need that because I'm not going to famine. Try and tell your body that as a result of hormones as well. But there are other things that we need, and that includes the cell membrane. So every single cell in your body is lined, so the membrane of that, the lining, is actually made up of fat, which means that those people that are low in fat actually really struggle with being able to regenerate new cells, and may have problems in relation to fighting off infections as well. The another thing we use it for is uptake and storage of fat-soluble vitamins. We'll come on to this in the vitamin side, but there are some vitamins that are only able to be uptaken by our body and only be able to stored in fat, which means that as a result, if you don't have enough fat on your body, you actually may well not be able to get the vitamins that you require as well. The other side is that we use it to synthesize other substances. So fat is makes up our cholesterol. So the dietary fat that we eat creates cholesterol, and cholesterol and essential fatty acids what create our enzymes, our hormones, everything in our body that then goes on and controls every other part of our body. So you can see that if we don't have dietary fat, that actually we're putting ourselves in quite a bad place. We put ourselves in a place whereby we're not able to uptake vitamins, we're not able to create hormones, we're not able to synthesize other substances within the body or get enzymes out there, we're not able to regenerate cells, and we're not able to access any fat utilizing it from an energy point of view. So these 4 major uses are really important to remember, and they're really great talking points when you're talking with your client if they're advocates of a low-fat diet in particular. So let's look at how we actually digest fat. So first of all, it's broken down in the duodenum by lipase. Now, we've spoken about this in the digestion module, so make sure you go back and have a look. But as a review, lipase is the enzyme that breaks down fat and it emulsifies it, and that's in the duodenum. The fats are called lipids when they're in their broken down state. So they become little molecules, and those little molecules are classed as lipids. Now, lipids get converted into cholesterol in the liver. So our liver actually creates cholesterol using the dietary fat that we consume. Now, the type of cholesterol that will turn into depends on the environment and the type of dietary fat that we take in. But as a whole, you need to know that we need that cholesterol, because remember, that's what makes up our hormones and our enzymes, etc. as well. It's not just what we see as bad cholesterol in our blood, for example, that might cause heart attacks down the line. There's lots of different types of cholesterol, and that will depend on the environment and also the types of dietary fat that we take in. So let's have a look at the types of dietary fat that we can take in. There are some really clear classifications. 3, in fact. So there are 3 really clear classifications. The first one that I'll go through is saturated fat. Now, saturated fats were for years seen as bad for us. They were seen as something, oh, it's greasy, it's not good for you, that's what will line your arteries. And actually, the more research lately is coming out that actually saturated fat isn't necessarily the worst for us, that we could do with a little bit from it. It doesn't mean that we can go and have fry-ups all round though, just so you know. And it's kind of classed as the middle of the road. It's not really, really bad, but it's not really, really great. So that's where we are with saturated fats. And it mainly comes from animal products, but there are other things that are saturated fats which are solid at room temperature. So all saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So think about a saturated fat or a fat that you know of. Is it solid when it's left at room temperature? So the first one I can tell you about is obviously meats. The fat that lines in between meat doesn't go runny, that stays solid, doesn't it? And like you see on this steak in the image here, and in certain fishes as well, but also in coconut oil as well. And if the easiest way to remember that is literally solid at room temperature. You buy it in a solid form and it's just sitting on the shelf. So saturated fats, solid at room temperature, and they mainly come from animal products, but that is not exclusive. Then we have unsaturated fats. Now these are the 2 thumbs up for unsaturated fats. These are classed as the good ones, okay? So these are classed as the healthy ones that we can take in on our body, and that will contribute most to the good cholesterols that we need in our body, that will contribute to the daily functions that we need in particular. Now, these are mainly from non-animal sources, which means it is going to come from nuts, seeds, avocados. It's going to come from even fish. So remember I said mainly non-animal. Going to get a lot from certain fishes as well. So these are liquid at room temperature. Now the result of this one being liquid at room temperature means that it's obviously, you've got a clear differentiation between what makes something unsaturated and saturated. Another ones I can add in with unsaturated, things like olive oils, sunflower oils, those type things. And these are classed as monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. I'll go into the differences shortly so you can see the molecular structure, but really that's the only thing that's different between these two, is the molecular structure of the two. They're both classed as unsaturated. Now the final one, this final one is trans fats. Now these are the big no-nos. So where I said that saturated fats kind of sits in the middle, it's okay. Unsaturated fats are the good ones. Trans fats are the real bad ones. Now that's because they don't occur naturally in anything that grows or that moves or that lives. It's created, so it's produced through hydrogenation. And I'm going to go through that whole system shortly with you so you know exactly what's happening. But you're going to find these trans fats in highly processed foods, in particular cakes, pastries, things whereby they want to make sure that that food can stay solid at room temperature, but they've done it through using some unsaturated fats. So as a result, it looks like it's low in fat, but actually it's a problem for our system because we're taking in a lot of chemicals and a lot of difficult to digest fats. So trans fats actually are not so good of the fats that we can take in. So fat is made up mainly of triglycerides, and they all have different chain lengths, and that's what makes these different on a molecular structure. Some of these are easy for us to break down, like for example the mono and polyunsaturated. Some of them are really hard to break down, like the trans fats. And that's what gives it a different reaction as to how it resolves in our body, how we're able to turn that into energy, turn it into cholesterol, turn it into things we can use in our body. So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. So structure of fat. Now the structure of fat has literally lots of carbons, and you can see that on this top one just in front of you. So this top image on the screen now, you can see these carbons going across the middle. Now with this structure of fat, it's also got lots of hydrogens on there as well. Now as a result, it's got a little fatty acid tail which has 3 little hydrogens sitting on the end, and it has what we class as a glycerol head, and that's that thing that looks like antennae. So the easiest way, you won't really need to know these in massive detail, especially for your level 3 exam, but it's good to know these differences so you understand what's happening in the body. Now you've got a glycerol head which looks like the antennae, and you've got a fatty acid tail which kind of looks like the tail of this structure of fat. Now that's the molecular structure. Let's look at how that varies in between all of the different types of fat that we have. So we'll start with unsaturated, and you can see that the two at the bottom here are monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Now the difference between them is that you can see these little double bond kinks. So these little double bonds in here, the monounsaturated just has one of them, whereas the polyunsaturated has 2 or more double bond kinks throughout it, and that's what makes it the difference between being mono and polyunsaturated fats. Now when we're talking about cholesterol in particular, this has come up earlier that we were talking about, and we want to say about how do we use this mono and So let's have a look into these 3 different types of fats in a little bit more detail, and I just want to show you about the chain lengths and the molecular structure of them. So you don't need to know these in massive detail, and what I wanted to do was just show you the differences so you understand what's happened. Now the structure of fat in this molecule, you can see, has a little glycerol head on one side, kind of looks like antennae on the right hand side of your screen, and then it's got what we class as a fatty acid tail, whereby it's all hydrogens on the very end. Now this is made up of carbon and hydrogens the whole way across, and then just got that glycerol head at the top. Now this varies per type that we were talking about. So you have things like the monounsaturated fatty acids got a kink in it. It's got a double bond kink whereby it's not got hydrogens covering everywhere. There's one little bit where there's less hydrogens. And then you've got another part with polyunsaturated whereby it's got 2 double bond kinks, and those 2 double bond kinks that you can see basically means there's even less hydrogens in it, and that's actually what makes that good for us, the less hydrogens and the more carbons in there. So that's the double bond kink that allows us to be able to break it down even easier in our body. You compare that to the structure of fat that you can see at the top. That's what we class as a saturated fatty acid, the one that we're talking about to start off with. Now the reason why this is different is, can you see it's totally saturated with as many hydrogens as possible. Wherever there is a C, there's a hydrogen adjoined, whereas you can see that's less of the case on the unsaturated ones just below. So saturated fats are saturated in hydrogens, that's where that comes from. There's lots of hydrogens attached. Then you've got the poly and mono unsaturated, whereby they've got some double kinks in there. Mono will just have 1 double bond, and then poly will have more than 2, or 2 or more. Now we've not got an image of trans fats in here, and the reason why that's not there is because it acts like one of these fat cells, but what it is it's totally different in how it's made. Because it is created, they've basically taken a mono or a polyunsaturated fat, and then they've heated it massively. So they take it up to really high temperatures, and then they go through a chemical process with it that forces hydrogens back onto it. So it actually ends up looking and being like a saturated fatty acid, but it comes from the result of chemically altering a poly or a mono, which means it might sound great because it's come from using olive oil. So like margarine that's created using olive oil, you might go, oh, well, that's good because olive oil is mono and polyunsaturated. But remember, margarine can be set out on the side for ages and not go, doesn't go soft. It's not liquid at room temperature. So it's acting like a saturated fatty acid, which in that place, as it's acting like a saturated fat, is actually trans fat because it's been forced to do that by a chemical process. So there are little differences between these different molecular structures. You will not be asked a molecular structure at a level 3 nutrition exam at all, but it is worth understanding just the differences in the names. It comes from the difference of their structure. Now, I just want to explain to you in a lot more detail about cholesterol in particular. We mentioned this earlier in how we create cholesterol in our body. We actually make it in our liver. Now, we are always seen as, oh, this is a bad thing that we've got cholesterol, and cholesterol is always seen as a bad thing, and that lots of people have high cholesterol nowadays, which is linked to heart disease, linked to heart attacks, and as a result, that's then pitched cholesterol is bad. But we make it in our body, and any other animal that has a liver will also make it. So that means we can consume it in animal products as well, which means that you have meat from a cow, from a pig. They've been creating cholesterol in their body from the fats that they've been eating, which means that as soon as we ingest that, we're also ingesting their created cholesterol as well. So that's where it's coming from. But is it good or bad? And that's kind of this difference. We've got two very distinct types of cholesterol. One is classed as good, and I'm saying that in inverted commas, and the other is classed as bad. Now, I want to pitch this as literally being the high density lipoproteins. Now, these are high density. Think of them as floating. As sinking, high density lipoproteins. These are good, and these are basically the street cleaners. These are the ones that come along and they take fat for a piggyback. So they're literally cholesterol that's zipping around our blood, and they'll see fat, they'll give it a piggyback, and they'll take it to the area of the body where it needs to be disposed of. So these are like the street cleaners of our arteries. So HDLs are the good ones, and the way I remember this is that H equals happy, so they're the good ones, so high density lipoproteins. Just before I move on to low density, lipoprotein just means a fat protein. So remember we said lipids is what the fats get broken down into? Lipoproteins means fat proteins. So these are classed as the good ones. Now let's move on to the low density lipoproteins, and these are obviously sound quite different, don't they? These are LDLs. Now these consist of two different types. One of them is very harmful to us, and this is a lot less buoyant, and it's really small, and it's a VLDL. This is a very low density lipoprotein. And then you've also got the others that are not harmful at all to us. So there is a mixture in here, but overall we class LDLs as being bad for us, even though there's some in there that are good for us. And remember, we're creating both of these. Yes, we ingest some, but we create both of these types in our liver. Now, these bad ones are like messy festival goers. They literally just leave their dirty rubbish all over the place. So they kind of are taking waste products and leaving it in our arteries. They're literally dropping down waste along the inside of the artery. So as they're layering that on, that then can cause things like atherosclerosis and arteriosclerosis. That then can lead to a clot, it can lead to a stroke, it can lead to a heart attack, and that's all because of the ratio between the amount of litter being dropped and the amount of cleaning that takes place. So it's not that we can blame just LDLs or that we can just thank HDLs for the cleanup process. We actually know it's the ratio of them. So if you think about a festival, for example, like this picture on here, there isn't much cleaning going on in comparison to litter dropping, which is why it gets really, really messy. The same as if people are having poor lifestyle, having lots of trans fats in particular, some saturated fats. Those are going to stimulate more LDLs and they're just going to keep dropping litter all over our arteries. And then we need to have more HDLs come in to be able to actually get on top of that and start cleaning those arteries up. And that's really that relationship between HDLs and LDLs. It's that street cleaner versus the messy festival goer. And as soon as that balance is correct, because we know that we get HDLs from the good fats, we create HDLs in our body as a result of ingesting good fats, but also from doing exercise. So you increase your high density lipoproteins when you exercise. So you know that from all the lifestyle changes your client's going to make, you're looking to rectify that ratio so there is more good street cleaners in their body and less messy festival goers. That's what our target is with cholesterol. It's neither good nor bad, but there are some areas in relation to ratio that can be improved. Now I want to talk about essential fatty acids. So you will need to know about these for your exam in particular. And that's because essential fatty acids generally come from poly and mono unsaturated foods. So these include oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines. They include vegetable oils, olive oils, seeds, nuts. So they're coming from, and they're liquid at room temperature. So they're in this place whereby they are totally liquid at room temperature. Now, these protect against heart disease. They're really, really important. So these are going to help with preventing against heart disease and the prevention of clots, just for that same reason I was telling you about a moment ago. They reduce inflammation. So if you have clients that have got arthritis or asthma, or they have other inflammation in their body that's responding in different ways, then just by taking on these types of essential fatty acids, they're omega-3, 6, and 9s, I'm sure you've heard of them before, that means that they're able to reduce the inflammation in their body and therefore look and feel much healthier. There is also a beneficial effect on blood lipid profiles for the same reason that I was telling you about earlier, and that we actually reduce LDLs by reducing the synthesis of liver very low density lipoproteins. And that's also alongside that ratio balance, just to try and ensure we get higher levels of HDLs and we can gradually reduce the LDLs and VLDLs. Now, alongside this, it also enhances our immune responsiveness. So not only are we protecting against heart disease, getting better blood lipid profiles, we're reducing inflammation, we also get an enhancement to our immune system. So that means that we get a support from our lymphocytes. And the lymphocytes are part of our lymph network, and that's where we remove waste from. So if that gets better, our whole system goes up a couple of notches in terms of effectiveness. So really important to make sure your clients are getting a certain level of essential fatty acids, not just when we're talking about, oh, they need to have some fats, but we need to make sure that some of these are coming from poly and mono unsaturated, and especially from the essential fatty acids and the omega-3, 6s and 9s. So also I want to talk in relation to fats about reduced fat diets. Now you know how important fat is for our body. Do you think we need it reduced? And this is kind of the biggest question, isn't it? And to be classed as a reduced fat, so like this yogurt pot you can see on the screen at the moment, it's classed as low fat. It must have at least 25% less fat content than the original product. That doesn't mean that it is a particular number of low fat. So it might just mean that the original version was very high fat. So it can be misleading, and it's important to teach our clients that actually just because it says reduced fat doesn't mean it's a healthier option. And the second reason for that is because reduced fat usually would taste horrible, because the fat is what allows us to go, oh, that tastes nice, and it's pleasurable to our taste buds because they know we need it. So instead of it being a bland and boring kind of taste, they will add in a lot more sugar in the case of a yogurt, or salt in the case of, say, processed foods or pre-packed meals. So reduced fat usually means that they've increased sugar, sweeteners, or salt, and that's more harmful to us than taking on fat that we're able to assimilate through our bodies. So what do you think? Do you think fat should be reduced in diets? Have a little moment to just think, where do you stand on this? Even after everything I've spoken through, you might have some clear ideas. You might personally do low fat, or you might know others that do. So what is your ideas about reduced fat diets? And really have a little thought about where you sit with this, because that's an important part of your learning. Now, the other side in relation to this is, I personally believe that trans fats should definitely be reduced, and they're obviously coming from the processed foods element, but then the saturated fats that come from natural sources, and in particular the mono and poly, should stay, and that we should be biased towards those unsaturated fats as much as possible. But the odd bit of saturated fat isn't really going to harm us. It's only if we're dependent on the wrong types of fats in our diet. So that's my personal belief. It also overlaps with the guidelines in terms of promoting that poly and mono unsaturated diet. So a little workshop for you. I just want you to pause the video and do these little tasks. So they'll help you understand a little bit more about fats, help you sort of deliver where you are with your head. And these questions are also in the cheat sheet, so you can use these as you head on through. First question is, what are the consequences of a high and low fat diet? So think about, if you had a high fat diet, what would the consequence be? If you had a low fat diet, what would the consequences be? So you could do this as a table, which is how it appears in your cheat sheet, literally consequences of a high fat diet, consequences of a low fat diet, and just list them out. And then when you go to download your cheat sheet, you'll be able to see the answers that we suggest in there as well. The second question is, what would you say to someone who wants to eat a better balance of fat in their diet? I may well have just answered that a little bit in the previous slide, and we're talking about reducing trans fats, for example. So have a think about the rules and the suggestions you'd put out there for a client that wanted to have a better balance of fat in their diet. And then again, we've got some suggested answers for that in your cheat sheet, so you can check through your understanding once you come out of it. So we're actually finished on fats already, and we're going to head through to proteins. If you haven't done those little workshop tasks, I suggest you just take a moment to do it. Take a little breather if you need to. Remember, you can pause these videos at any point. And this is a longer module because we're covering through in quite a lot of detail. But time to head straight into proteins. And everybody consumes proteins. Everybody has their opinions on what proteins are, how important they are. And we're going to clear all of that up so we understand what's going on. Now let's look at the function of protein. First of all, it's building, growth and repair of body tissue. So it does growth and repair. There are its two main things, growth and repair, which means that it's not necessarily that we use it for energy, which we can do if we need to, but it's more that we use this one for repairing tissue that we've broken down in our body. So for example, after a gym session and you tear all those actin and myosin in your muscle fibers, you then get to a point that needs to be repaired by something, and protein helps to repair that. It's a constituent part of cell membranes. So remember, fat was a good part of cell membranes. So is protein, really important part. It's production of enzymes, hormones and antibodies. This is sounding familiar to what we had for fat as well. And it can contribute to our body's energy needs as and when we need it. So it can be used for energy as well. The other side of it is it makes up 18 to 20% of our body weight. That's just protein. The fat percentage will vary. The protein will vary in relation to the muscle mass, our organs. That's all protein. So it's important to know that when we talk about protein in our body and in a stored capacity, it's not just our muscles, it's also all of our organs and a lot of our cells as well. So let's look at the actual digestion of protein, how we break it down. Just before I get started into that, you can actually see this is the molecular structure of your protein. Now, we class a protein when it's broken down by the stomach. We then class it as an amino acid. So this is your amino acid, and I'll go through that in just a second. So it's broken down in the stomach. So you know your digestive system now. When it hits the stomach, pepsin breaks it down. And then when it hits the duodenum, which is, I remember, the first part of the small intestine, trypsin then breaks it down again. So it's having two different levels of breaking down, and it goes from being a protein or a slab of meat, as we might see it, down into something what we call an amino acid. And this is what your amino acid looks like. It's got an amino group and an acid group, and they're joined together. You don't need to know it in massive detail. You do not need to know the molecular structure, but it just can help to have a little bit of a grounding as to why it's classed as an amino acid, because it's got an acid on one side and an amino on the other side, and they're joined together. So that can help you with remembering what that's actually called when protein is broken down into amino acids. Now, how much protein do we actually need? I think this is probably the biggest question that most people come to us with, or will come to you as a nutritional advisor when they're asking for nutritional help. How much protein should I have? So it has to be at set levels to provide enough protein for nitrogen balance. If you have too much, it can skew nitrogen balance. If you have too little, it can also skew it. So we're actually looking at, for most people, for sedentary or recreational exercises, they should be aiming between 0.8 and 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight. I would just say always go off the 1.5 for this. There's no need to really take someone down to 0.8, but it would be adaptable over time. So you can start tweaking that macro plan over time so that it works at a most optimal rate for them. But I would definitely start 1.5 for a sedentary or recreational exerciser. If somebody is doing endurance training, it doesn't go up massively from here. We're just at 1.2 to 1.6. For strength training, it's 1.5 to 1.7, and then for strength, but also for on the upper edge, the maximum we would encourage someone to go to is 2 grams per kilo of body weight. Now, when you're setting out with someone, you might go, oh, there's not much difference really between 1 gram for the sedentary and 2 grams for the upper limit. But when you're working out your clients, say for example they're 60 kilos, if they have 1 gram when they're sedentary, 1 gram per kilo, they're actually having 60 grams per day. That's doubled if they're at the upper limit, which is as much as 120 grams. So it gives you a huge amount of playing and flexibility here, depending on how they respond to protein. Everybody responds differently. Some people gain a lot of weight on protein. Some people actually need a lot of protein in order to thrive. So everybody is at a different point, and it's about tweaking that one and reviewing it as you get into it. But these are the guidelines, and it would be worth remembering these guidelines for your exams as well. They can quite often ask about these guidelines. In terms of the overconsumption of protein, this is more common than the underconsumption of protein, because we have things like protein bars, protein shakes, an abundance of meats and fish really easily available to us compared to our ancestors. Now, the problem, if it's overconsumed, over that 2 grams per kilo of body weight or much over it, it's going to reduce bone density, because it's going to start leaching calcium out of the bones and then lose it via the urine. So more calcium loss and less bone density. It will put strain on the kidneys, because it's putting all that calcium through the urine. Then it's going to accelerate the deterioration established liver and kidney disorders. So if that person has established liver and kidney disorders, it's more strain on them, and it'll accelerate the deterioration. Then you've also got excess protein has a high energy value. So it's still 4 calories per gram. So if you're having more than it, it's not like you just wee it out. If it doesn't need that extra calorie in the body, it will contribute towards fat storage. It can be converted and moved into fat. It doesn't just instantly pop and appear onto your muscles, because remember, it breaks down into amino acids. But then if we have no use for that amino acids and it's an extra energy value, then that can contribute towards fat storage. High intakes from animal products might increase saturated fats. High intakes from processed foods could include trans fats, so especially things like cooked and prepared meats, like hams and things, whereby they're really binded together. These are all things to consider if you've got clients coming to you that are particularly, that you're worried are over consuming protein. You really want to make sure that they're around that 2 grams per kilo body weight maximum. So low protein consumption, this isn't so common here in developed countries, but it can be in developing countries. So developing countries may well have a problem with protein, but here in developed countries, generally our problem is overconsumption. The deficiency in essential amino acids reduce growth. So because it's responsible for growth and repair, it can put a massive strain on our body's amino acid pool if we're not consuming enough protein, which means that growth can be stunted at an early age, or that our cells just don't recover properly, which means that we actually end up with muscle loss and ultimately organ loss, making us really susceptible to diseases in particular. And there's a statement that I heard recently that has stuck with me a lot, is that if somebody is starving to death, they don't actually die from starvation. They die from organ failure because their protein is needed that badly that the body would rather break down key organs in the body in order to use that energy. So the body will always find the energy, but if you're not putting the right in amino acids, it will start breaking down organs. So in order to get that energy that it wants in that amino acid pool, which makes you really susceptible to diseases, limits growth, limits repair. Now there is a key thing with proteins that we need to be aware of. There are 20 different amino acids. They are divided into 2 different groups. So these little amino acids that we showed a molecular structure of, there are 20 different ones of those. You don't need to know the list and the names of them, but I believe in a lot of manuals they have them. You don't need to know which ones are classed as which. 9 of them are classed as essential amino acids, and these are primary, and these must be consumed to maintain normal body functions. If we don't consume them, that's when we'll want to be breaking down our own organs and muscles in order to find them. But there are also 11 non-essential amino acids. Now these non-essential ones can be synthesized from the other foods that we eat in our diet, or you might have to combine a couple of non-essential ones to create a complete protein. Now, just as a side note, it's really important that you check in relation to your manual and your awarding body, because some research suggests there are 8 essential and 12 non-essential, whereas the research we're going off on here is 9 essential and 11 non-essential. Please double check with your own awarding body and the information that you get from that awarding body in relation to your manual. Just check on that particular point so you're clear of what's appropriate for you for your exam. Either way, the one that contains all of the essential amino acids is classed as a complete protein. So that's a type of food that is classed as complete, and they are usually meats and dairy in particular, meats, fish and dairy, which means that those that don't have all 8 of the essential amino acids are classed as incomplete proteins, and they're going to be things that you can get from nuts and seeds, and that vegetarians will be using instead, so like soybeans, pulses, etc. Now the problem with this is that you need a certain combination to make sure that you can get all of the proteins in the body, but a culture or a particular belief that leaves somebody lacking in essential amino acids or lacking in complete proteins is actually going to lack their ability to grow and repair in their body. So they're more likely to have a protein deficiency on those that are vegetarians, vegans, and that might be from a belief or from a cultural point of view that they've chosen that. So it's really important that those are really clear about where their proteins are coming from, and they probably have to be quite imaginative about how they combine incomplete proteins so that they can get all 8 essential amino acids. Here's the list of completes and incompletes. So the complete, like I said, is all meats, fish, dairy, including whey protein. So your whey protein shakes that you've, I'm sure, heard of. Tofu, eggs, quinoa, buckwheat, hemp and chia seeds, and spirulina. So there are a few things in there that vegetarians would still be able to get from a complete point of view. But incomplete are grains, legumes, which are pulses, and nuts and seeds, and vegetables. So this is worth understanding the difference of. It can be a clear question on your exam. So make sure you're aware which ones are classed as complete, which ones are classed as incomplete. So that brings us to the end of proteins. So we're now going to head straight through to look at carbohydrates, and that will bring us towards the end of this module, where we'll wrap up with a couple of quick fire quiz questions before you can download your cheat sheet and check your answers. If you need a little pause in here, this again is a good place, or you might want to go and review your cheat sheet now just for what you've learned about proteins, and then come back and join me for the carbohydrates. So carbohydrates often have quite a bad name, actually, like cut out carbs. Low carbs are the way forward, but we need carbs, and we need them because they are brain food. They provide the body and the brain with the energy we need, and we can actually only create energy for our brain. Our brain only will use glucose, which is a broken down version of carbohydrates. So it's really important that we have it. It's also essential for cell walls, cell receptor sites, and synapses. So when you've got low carbohydrates in the body, your reactions go down. Your ability to sense and react to things changes. So it's really important to make sure those carbohydrates stay nice and high. Also, glucose is the essential fuel for the brain and the central nervous system, and necessary for complete fat metabolism. Really, really important point here is that people often, when they want to lose fat, cut out all carbs or try to cut out all carbs. But fat metabolism, fat burning, only happens when we also have carbohydrates in our diet as well. So if you have fats and carbs, then you can metabolize fat. If you just have fat in the diet and you're trying to then use that fat and you don't have the carbs, it won't allow you to do it. And the phrase for that is fat burns in carbohydrate flame. And that's a good way of remembering about how fat is metabolized using carbs. Now, there are several categorizations for carbohydrates, and I'm sure you've heard lots of different type things before. We can look at simple versus complex. We're going to look at fiber and soluble versus insoluble. We're going to look at the glycemic index, and we're also going to look at alive versus dead. And these are the ways that we're going to categorize them here. So let's look at simple versus complex. First of all, a simple carbohydrate is something that literally just has one molecule. It's really easy to break down. It doesn't even need breaking down. It's tiny. It has no little chains alongside all the elements. It's just a single, simple, and it's like a sugar. These include things like table sugar, fruit, certain fruits, so fructose that's in fruit, sweets, jam, marmalade, honey, certain energy drinks, soft drinks, milk. These are all simple sugars, and they're very quickly broken down. In fact, because they don't need much breaking down, you can literally absorb them from the inside of your mouth if needed, which means you can get it into your system very quickly. And that's the benefit of a simple sugar. Complex carbohydrates are starches and fibers, and these are things like wheat, so bread and pasta, oats, corn, barley, potatoes, rice, beans and lentils, peas, chickpeas, and vegetables. So all of these make up our carbohydrates that are complex. Really important to see these differences between the two, and how fruits are in simple, vegetables are in complex carbohydrates. Complex is going to break it down gradually over time. and that takes a little while because it's got to be influenced by the processes that happen in the duodenum, and it won't be absorbed until it hits the rest of that small intestine. So really takes a little bit longer to process in the body, and that has a different effect on our blood sugar levels, which we'll talk about shortly. And there are some foods out there that are a bit of a mix of both of them, and these, although generally might be processed, there are some types of fruits that have a good mix of both, where they have some fibre and some sugar. So some starchy fruits like bananas, for example, also apples when you eat them with the skin on, biscuits, cakes, sugary breakfast cereals, pastries, those type of things have fibre because they're a combination of wheat, and they also have the sweet sugariness as well. So just be mindful of where are you getting those food sources from, those carbohydrate food sources from. Are they complex or are they simple? And what is it that the desired result is? Do you want that energy in the system quickly, or do you want it to last a lot longer throughout the day? And that's a really clear way to break those down. So the other categorization that I mentioned was about fiber and about soluble versus insoluble. So fiber, and another name for fiber is non-starch polysaccharides. This will be worth remembering as a name for your fibers. So fiber is non-starch polysaccharide, also known as an NSP. Now these are broken down into soluble fibers and insoluble fibers. Now, soluble fibers are oats, barley, pulses, and certain fruits. And these basically, what makes them soluble is that when they mix with water, they mix with all of our digestive processes, they make a real nice mushiness. Like if you think about oats, when you mix them in with water and you warm them up, they become this mush, this porridgey mush. And that makes it very easy to assimilate down through our intestines and down through our digestive system, which actually means it can get this sticky gloop that will attach onto the side of our bowels as it moves through, and actually help remove things like bacteria as well. So soluble fiber is a really good thing to have in the diet because it helps actually assist on transit all the way through the body, in particular from things like fruits. But this is a little bit more mushy, so it will affect the consistencies. So then the other thing is to look at insoluble fiber, and this is the more chewy, the harder to break down items. So these don't mix with water, they don't emulsify, which means that they're things like wheat bran, whole grain breads and cereals, whereby you get little seeds on them, or the skins on fruit and vegetables. The easiest way to remember insoluble being the skins on fruits and vegetables is that if you've ever looked in the toilet after eating sweet corn the day or so before, you've noticed that you can see the sweet corn skins, and that's because the skin on the corn is insoluble, it's firm, and that means that it's not been able to be digested, it's just come straight out and it's been transported through. This roughage though is quite good as a fibre for dragging out the bad bits of our digestive system and keeping it nice and squeaky clean. So let's also look at glycemic index and load. So if you've not come across GI before, GI is basically the ranking of carbohydrate foods in relation to the immediate effects on our blood sugar levels, and that's glycemic index. A way to remember that is the GLY of this is like the GL comes from glucose, so glucose levels in the body, and glycemic is the level of index. So we're looking at what's the index, the number that's given in terms of ranking of carbohydrate foods in relation to the immediate effect it has on our sugar levels. Now, what do I mean by that? If you have something that is very high GI, let's say something very sweet that will send your sugar levels up very quickly. Let's say a sugar cube, okay? You pop that right on your tongue. It's absorbed very, very quickly, and it gives you a sharp spike in blood glucose level. That's that red line you can see on your screen now. That red line, then once we're combated by bringing in some insulin to take it back down, we end up with a sharp dip back down. So you'll know this from your hormones part of your anatomy and physiology, that glucose and insulin work together. So as soon as you've got a high spike of glucose, you then need a high spike of insulin to bring it back down. Problem is, it can bring it back really low and we can end up feeling dreadful later on in the day. Or it might choose us to then go for something else high, like GI. So we end up with a perpetual cycle of choosing sweet, sugary items. Whereas if you compare this to something that's low GI, usually this includes a lot more of those complex carbohydrates we were talking about, it actually digests over time, and the secretion of the glucose, or like the blood glucose levels, gradually goes up. And it doesn't reach a massive high, which means we don't get a massive insulin spike, and it just gradually wears off over time. So it's much more sustainable. And you can see that here on this screen really easily. Low GI will make you feel a lot more satiated for longer. High GI will give you a good kick of energy. So they all have their place. And if you wanted to find this same graph, you can go to glycemicindex.com. It's got loads of information on there about index, and it's a suitable website for you to go to get information that's right. Now I want to explain about glycemic load. So glycemic load is the combination of the glycemic index but also the portion size. So glycemic index on its own doesn't consider portion size, which obviously that's how we consume it, isn't it? We consume it in a particular amount. So glycemic load can be seen as being a little bit more accurate because it considers the portion size as well. The way you'd work out the glycemic load, for example, is a single apple has a GI of 40 and it contains 15 grams of carbohydrate per portion. So you just times 40 by 15 and then divide that by 100 and you'd end up with 6. And then that would give you your glycemic load numbers. And quite often it's very easy to find charts for glycemic loads and glycemic indexes which allow you to be able to compare one versus the other. In fact, they're available as part of the resources in the bonus section here. So make sure you go down and have a little look at the glycemic index and glycemic load charts so you can see what foods your clients are eating that are GI, high GI, low GI, and where the GL fits in there as well. So here's a little summary of those. Like we were saying, low GI is going to have a small increase on blood sugar level after a meal. It's good for people that are looking for good weight control because it controls appetite, and it's also much better for people with diabetes because of that relationship with insulin spikes. And then also it's great for prolonged physical endurance. Whereas high GI is much better for providing a quick supply of energy and beneficial for fueling during and after prolonged exercise. So it has its purpose for that quick peak. But the problem is that can lead to lethargy when it troughs very quickly and low concentration, and it can promote fat storage because of the high insulin response. So if somebody's looking for weight loss, we generally encourage them to go for a lower GI option. Here's more about the GI and GL. So the glycemic index and load scale food is given a rating of low, medium and high. So anything in GI over 70 is classed as high. A medium is 55 to 69. Low is less than 55. But for glycemic load, because it's considering the portion size, you now have high being more than 20, medium being 11 to 19, and low being less than or equal to 10. So it's important to know these. You don't need to know it necessarily for your exam, but you do need to know the difference of what glycemic index is and what the difference of high GI foods compared to low GI foods. Okay, so look, just thinking about these parts with GI and GL. So I just want you to have a look at an image I'm going to pop up here for a meal in a moment. I just want you to think about the manufacturing processes, the types of starch, the cooking methods, the food combinations, the fats, proteins and fiber content. How do you think this meal will affect the GI effect on this body? Will they get a real short, sharp response, or do you think it will be a slow and steady response? So have a little look. What have we got on here? We've got it looks like a brown seeded roll. We've got 2 boiled eggs. We've got some butter. We've got some I would say granola with a couple of strawberries on top, an apple, a coffee. There's some sugar on the table as well, and an orange juice. So how does this breakfast meal contribute to GI? Do you think it would give them a high GI spike, or do you think it would be a long-lasting low GI effect on the body? Now, it's true, they will definitely get a bit of a sharp spike in here, won't they? Because there's certain sugars going on in the system. In particular, the orange juice, the fruit, for example, the sugar that they might be putting in their coffee. So they will get a really good sharp kick. But they also have some good complex foods that will give them a little bit longer, and that's things like the starchy breads and the granola and the eggs in particular, which will slow it down a little bit. It's not the lowest GI that they could have for a breakfast. A much lower one would be one full of proteins. That will last them a lot longer, make them feel a lot more satiated, whereas it's certainly not the worst for high GI either. That would be something that is all fruit and sugars and had no starchiness in it at all. So it's important to kind of think about how the food combination of what your client is eating can mix GIs rather than it being a black and white high or low. So that's a really important factor to consider. Now, the final classification I wanted to go through in relation to carbohydrates in particular is about living food versus beige dead food. Now, you may well have heard of this in relation to carbohydrates, and a lot of people see carbohydrates as the beige dead food on the right hand side, and when they say I'm on a low carb diet, they actually hopefully mean cutting out the low nutrient high energy foods that you see on the right hand side of the screen: pastas, breads, potatoes, cakes, pastries, crisps, all those type of things. They're beige in colour, they're void of nutrients, and they have very high caloric value. Compare that to the food on the left hand side: beautiful colours, really vibrant, living food. They're full of water, so the others are dry. These are really full of water. They are nutrient dense, lots of vitamins and minerals in there. They have low energy, and certainly from a perspective in relation to gram for gram with the high energy version, and that's partly because there's more water content in them. Naturally occurring water content is going to change the gram for gram of how much of it is actually carbohydrate. So nutrient dense, low energy, and I would always suggest for clients to increase their carbohydrates via living foods and avoid beige dead foods as much as possible that are low in nutrients. However, it's still important that they reach a certain level of carbohydrate and a certain level of calories. People can take it too far by cutting out too many of these, and then they end up in a low calorie consumption, which just doesn't serve their needs that they have, especially if they're active beings. So it kind of seems like the appropriate point to move on and look at vitamins and minerals. That leads us to the end of carbohydrates as well, and you've kind of got a really clear breakdown of carbohydrates in several different classification forms. But think about which types really resonate for you and make sure you're aware of all of those as you head on through. Now let's look at vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals are a real fundamental part, but these are micronutrients. We've done the macronutrients now. Remember, macros were carbs, fats and proteins. We now have micronutrients, and that's because we need them in such small amounts. Now, vitamins are organic compounds naturally occurring in the food. They don't provide us with any physical energy. We won't get any calories from them, and we need them in such small amounts compared to the macros. And these really are essential for all chemical reactions in our body. So that means that without a certain level of vitamins going into our body, our chemical reactions can't happen, and 9 times out of 10 we can't then use the energy that we've taken in from the macros. So it's a real fine balance. With few exceptions, all have to be provided from the diet. We can't take them from anywhere else. Phytonutrients are organic compounds associated with benefits to health. Phytonutrients is a really important word for you to be aware of. It just means they're organic. They've come from food naturally, from the food that we grow and consume, and they benefit our health massively. And you won't get phytonutrients in pills and potions. They only come in the food that we consume. So vitamins are not just about vitamin as a pill. It's about vitamins in the food that we consume, and that's why we want lots of those alive carbohydrates as much as possible. So let's introduce you to some of these vitamins. Now, fat-soluble vitamins in particular, ADEK, A, D, E, and K, you will need to know this. I would make sure that you find yourself a system so you can remember fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. That's ADEK. Fat-soluble vitamins are stored in the liver. So these 4 different vitamins are stored in the liver, and we need them because vitamin A is used for vision and for assisting in our ability to grow and have good vision. Vitamin D is used for bone growth and development and regulation of our calcium levels. So this one is really, really important to make sure that everybody is getting good levels of vitamin D. And it used to always be said that, oh, if somebody needs good bone growth, you just need to make sure they have calcium. But the calcium means nothing unless they also have good vitamin D. So it goes round and round in circles. Vitamin E protects tissues from chemical damage, and you often find vitamin E in like face moisturizers and things like that. Vitamin K is used for blood clotting and for assisting in blood clotting, which is a good thing. Also, excessive amounts can be toxic and affect liver function. So we don't want excessive amounts of any of these, but we do want to make sure we're taking them on board. So where do we get them from? Vitamin A is going to come from mackerel, is going to come from sort of oily fish. We also get it from meats, in particular livers. So liver and kidney, so offal that you might consume is usually very high in vitamin A. But outside of that, so is anything with a ready tinge as food, as natural food, so vegetables, carrot, beetroot, these type of things are high in vitamin A, and that's because of the beta-carotene in it. Then you've got things like certain levels of dairy and green leafy vegetables will also give you vitamin A. Vitamin D is going to come from sunlight partly, but also you can get it from eggs, mackerel and oily fish, but also from fortified cereals. Quite often cereals get fortified to allow us to have vitamin D in it. They might bill this or market this as a very effective way of getting vitamin D in the body, but really the more you can get from good oils and essential fatty acids, the better. Vitamin E, like I said, they often put this in moisturizers and things, but generally we're going to ingest this. You're going to find this in olive oils, green leafy vegetables and certain cereals as well. Then vitamin K is going to all come from green leafy vegetables. This is our spinach, curly kale, cabbages, really important things to be getting in our system. And really you can't do wrong if you've got a good balanced diet of your essential fatty acids, green leafy veg, and a range of colours in the vegetables that you're taking in. That will make sure that you get a good level of all 4 of these fat-soluble vitamins ADEK. Now, there are some other antioxidants that are vitamins, and these are ACE vitamins. So antioxidants are ACE. This is the way to remember this bit. A, C and E vitamins have a special property. Now remember, A and E are fat soluble. C is water soluble, so we class that as a water soluble vitamin. Good to remember the difference on that. But those 3 all help combat the effects of oxygen-free radicals in our body. They are antioxidants. They are like the superheroes of our vitamins. So we need to make sure we get plenty A, C and E. The reason why we can see this in our body is that the effects of oxygen-free radicals you can actually see in your body, and that's through aging skin and loss of skin elasticity. So if somebody looks older or much older than they are, then you can generally be sure that they're not having quite enough A, C and E vitamins. That's a really important thing for younger, healthier looking skin. Internally, they start damaging cells, and that can in turn lead to cancer. So antioxidants, we're also talking about being like the heroes to fight off things like cancer as well. Free radicals occur when oxidation reactions become out of control, and it's the result of the antioxidants to bring them back into control, and they render them neutral. So the diets that are rich in fruit and vegetables provide a good supply of antioxidants, aim to have a mixture of colours, and you will more than likely be getting a good mixture of your A, C and E. So you want green leafy fruit and vegetables, red and yellow ones as well, so nice bright colours, and that will allow you to have more of these great antioxidants that can go in there and combat the effects of the oxygen-free radicals that are in our body, and that will basically massive health benefits. But this is what your client's probably looking for when they say they want to look better, feel healthier, have better skin, look younger. They need more ACE vitamins in their diet, most definitely. Now, the health properties of these antioxidant compounds is that it, like I said earlier, has a positive effect on cancer prevention. It can lower cholesterol and reduce the risk of coronary heart disease as well. They can support our immune system, and also it has positive effect on our gut bacteria. So overall, I don't need to sell it to you anymore. We need to make sure that our clients are having a good level of vitamins, not only fat-soluble vitamins of ADEC, but also water-soluble vitamins, which are B and C, and then our ACE vitamins, which are antioxidants, which are A, C, and E. So make sure there is a big variety, and that just comes from an influx of fruit and vegetables that come from a range of colours. So a couple of tasks to really wrap this whole module up together. As I say, you've got the cheat sheet and there will be questions in there for each different section we've done here today, and it's been a long module, so thank you for your constant concentration throughout. For this part, let's just go through, do these questions, and then you can download your cheat sheet and get the answers through there as well for the other questions on your cheat sheet. So for question 1, what is the significant source of water-soluble vitamins and minerals? Now think about it. Break down what it's actually asking you, and it's asking you about a source of vitamins, but in particular water-soluble vitamins. It's not talking about fat-soluble. Is it milk and dairy, fruit and vegetables, jelly sweets, or processed cereals? So already you can start breaking them down bit by bit. Have a little think, find out what your answer is, pause me if you need to, and I'm going to deliver the answer now. So the answer is B, fruit and vegetables. Obviously, we've been talking about fruit and vegetables the whole way through it. There's no way that you would get a significant source of water-soluble vitamins, which remember is B and C, from jelly sweets or milk and dairy, or even from processed cereals. And if you got a little bit from, say, the dairy or from cereals, it wouldn't be a significant source. It's got to be fruit and vegetables. Fantastic, hope you got that one right. Now question 2 is how much energy does 10 grams of fat provide? So you need to remember how many calories there were per gram of fat, and then you need to work out what 10 grams of fat would provide you. So I'll give you a second to be able to do your maths. Is it 9 calories, 30 calories, 90 calories, or 120? So pause me if you need to. If not, I'm going to answer that question now. So question 2, the answer is C, and that's 90 calories. Remember, there are 9 calories per gram of fat. Times that by the 10 grams, you have 90 calories. Nice and straightforward. Be prepared to have questions like this in your exam, and that's why you need to know those calorie differences for each of the macros. I hope that alongside everything that we've spoken about today, not only alongside the exam and being prepared for the exam and understanding multiple choice questions, which you can practice in that cheat sheet, but I hope it's given you a massive understanding of what actually is in the food we eat and why guidelines suggest to go towards more fruit and veg. In particular, that just kept coming up today, didn't it? So make sure you download the cheat sheet and complete that. That's a really great way of checking your understanding from all the content in today's session. So we were speaking about understanding the function of each macronutrient. We understood the RDA, so how much we actually need of each macronutrient. We explained how carbs, fats and proteins are digested, what they become, so fats becoming lipids, proteins becoming amino acids, carbs becoming glucose, and then how that's used in our body and what that function is. And then we also looked at the understanding of micronutrients, why we need those vitamins in our body. And then obviously you can check your understanding with that cheat sheet as well. So well done for your concentration throughout the entirety of this module 2. If you need any help at all or assistance with any of your learning, please do reach out, info@parallel-coaching.com. I'll be happy to help you. Remember, you've got lots of resources at the very bottom of this in the bonus section, and obviously you've got that cheat sheet to help you with some questions as well. Hope you've enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to hearing from you with your feedback. Other than that, I'll see you in the next module. Take care.